All right, this is a shorter devlog update. I just wanted to get on here and talk about a few of the improvements to performance and optimization that I made after the last video. So I posted the last video and I was hoping I'd get some comments, people giving advice on what we could do to improve things. And sure enough, I got a lot of good comments. So we're going to talk about 4 improvements that I made, starting with the actor component itself. And it has to do with the way we're launching the line trace event. So before, what I was doing, if we go to the event graph for our actor component, is I was doing a, event tick. All right, I was doing the event tick, and I kind of knew this wasn't the most efficient way of doing things, but I didn't know what was more efficient. Well, we got that answer in the comments. I appreciate the advice. So before we were doing event tick, which is essentially launching that line trace for every single frame. Now you can imagine if we're getting ideal frame rates, if we're getting like 120 frames per second, that's launching that line trace 120 times every second, which can be kind of costly, obviously, especially if we're getting a hit event on every one of those frames. It's checking and getting information from what we're hitting 120 times every second. That's crazy. So the advice that I got was, instead of event tick, we could use this handy node called set timer by event. Now what this does is you can put in a specific second value. So right now it's set to 0.15 seconds. We could set this to an even 0.2 seconds. And what that's going to do is every 0.2 seconds, it'll launch this line trace. Just to put that into perspective, I think 0.2 seconds is what, like 5 times a second? You can imagine how much more performant it is to check on something 5 times a second compared to 120 times per second, or even 60 times per second. So 0.2 is kind of, it felt pretty accurate. It felt like there wasn't a delay when I looked at the interactive object and the little widget came up. Anything more than 0.2, I started to have like a perceptible delay when I looked at it and looked away. So 0.2, 0.15, anything around there feels pretty good. And yeah, this isn't dependent on frame rate, so it's not just going to go absolutely crazy if someone has a high frame rate. So this is nice. And this setup is a little bit different. We launched the set timer by event on event begin play. And then we have this little event delegate tick where we could choose our custom event interaction or interact trace. So the way I made that is I just said add custom event and we named it interact trace. And that's all there is to that. We still launch into our interaction trace function just as before, which brings us to our second change. That's the first one. We're doing set timer by event instead of event tick. The second change is in the line trace itself. So we're now doing this 5 times a second rather than 120 or whatever we're at before with frame rate. So now within this, I made some optimizations as well. So let me just back this up real quick to what we had before. Okay, so this is more or less what we had before. Now let's test this and let me show you what I'm talking about as far as optimizations go here. The way we had it was out of our line trace, we had a branch. This is good. Basically, we were checking, okay, is this hitting something? That's what this condition is here. Is this hitting something? Yes, it's hitting something. Okay, set the last hit actor as the hit actor. So for example, if we were hitting our mug here, we would say, okay, remember that mug, set it as a variable. I didn't know what we were going to do with that information. I just thought it would be a good idea to have that stored. So that's what we had before. And then we were passing on to our look at blueprint interface, which was passing on to our interactive object here, our blueprint storage. And that was basically just saying, okay, set the visibility of our widget. Are we looking at it? Remember that bool we set up is looking. Are we looking at it? Yes. Okay, make the widget visible. No, make the widget not visible. All right, so the way we had it before, let me just compile and save here. This is what was happening. We would look at it, look away, everything was fine. On the surface level, the functionality was perfectly fine. Now let me show you the problem with this. Let's go to our blueprint storage, for example, and let's just do a print string, okay? So whenever we get this as a hit, we're gonna print a string, and let's just say running, okay? Or let's say hit, all right? So we're gonna print a little string every time we get a hit calculation on this. And as you can see, when we look at this thing, even when we look away, hit, we look away, it's still calculating, hit. It's calculating that every 0.2 seconds. Before, it was calculating this every frame. So it could have been calculating this 120 times per second, all right? Now we could be a little bit cleaner about this, and we could create this in a way that opens us up to less bugs. Now the way that we've decided to do this time, let's get rid of that print string. We'll bring it back in just a second. Now what we did is I introduced, first thing, let's talk about the second branch. So I brought this second branch. Now this second branch is coming into play at the true. Let's get rid of this, okay? So are we hitting something? Yes, that's the first check. Are we hitting something? Yes. Okay, we're hitting something. That's some good information. Now we want to check something. What we're going to check is where this logic comes into play. Let's check, is our hit actor, is the thing we're hitting, is it not equal to the last thing we hit, the last hit actor? Remember, we're storing the last hit actor when we hit something. So we're saying, okay, is this not equal to that? Okay, it's not equal. It's something new. Go ahead and set that last hit actor. So this is the condition for this branch. Oh, it is equal? All right, don't set a new thing. We'll just stop right here. So basically, when we look at it, well, let's just do a print string right here so I can show you what I'm talking about. We'll call this hit again, compile, and we'll start. So remember when we were getting a hit every single time we went through this event? Now we look at this thing, and it's just one hit. It doesn't continue. All right? We look away and it doesn't go away, which is going to be the next part of the functionality. And we look back at it and it doesn't hit again. But that was one part of the equation. So we checked if it was not equal to the last hit actor. So that's great. But now we want to bring back the rest of the functionality that I have where we look away and the widget goes away. So that's where this comes into play. Now we need to know, so right now we know if we're hitting something, we carry through with this logic. But what if we don't hit something? What if we're not actively hitting something? What if we look away? Well, that's where this comes into play. I have a sequence that happens, all right? And I'll get into why I did a sequence and I didn't just go to this in a second. Actually, let's do that now. So if we're, for example, not looking at anything, if we're not getting a hit event, then we could just end things here and we could say set the last hit actor to nothing. We're leaving this blank. It's not setting it to anything. So we're essentially clearing that last hit actor. So we look away from our object and it's clearing the last hit actor. So now with that functionality, this is one step closer to what we want. We look at it, we get a hit. We look away, we look at it again, we get a hit. Look away, we look again, we get another hit. So every time we're looking at this, we're getting a new hit because when we look away, it forgets our last hit actor. So when we look at it again, it's brand new. It's like, oh, this is not the same as the last hit actor because it's new. All right. But the problem with this, as you can see, is we look at it, we look away, and the press E to search, that widget is still active. So we need to find a way to clear that widget. And the reason it's still active is because we have cleared, we looked away, we cleared the last hit actor, which was clearing our target. So now in our blueprint storage object, this is still happening, but now it doesn't know what it's looking at anymore. So actually this doesn't happen. It doesn't send it to this. The blueprint interface doesn't get this far anymore. So that's not very useful. So what could we do? Well, that's where this sequence comes into play. If we're not looking at something, if we look away from something, then I want to fire off a sequence. And the order of things here is really important. The first thing I want you to do, Unreal, is when I look away from my object, go ahead and just pass that information to this blueprint interface so that we fire off this event. So let's just do a print string right here. And we'll say made it, all right? Instead of made it, let's put the is looking in here, all right? And let's actually compile this, okay? Now, when we look away from something, it's setting our last hit actor to nothing. All right, let's just see what happens. We look at something, it says true, so that means it knows that we're looking at something. We look at something again, it says true, it knows we're looking at something. Why doesn't it know when we look away? It only knows when we look at it again. Shouldn't it say false when we look away? What's going on? Well, if you think about it, we look away. So looking at it is fine. Everything works perfectly. It sends the event to our interactive object here. Every time we look at it, it knows. So when it says true, it's basically saying, yeah, I know that we're looking at this thing. That's fine. But what the problem is when we look away, this false, when we don't have a hit actor, it doesn't know what to do. It's just clearing the last hit actor. Now, we could just take this and plug it into the look at, and you might think that's fine. We go false, clear the last hit actor, and we're still making it to the blueprint interface. The problem with this is the same thing. We look at it, we get a hit, and it's true. We're looking at it. We look away, and we don't get that information. That information doesn't come through. Why? We're sending it through right here. Well, the reason is we're clearing the last hit actor. So by the time we get here on this path right here, by the time we get here, even though we're going through, we've cleared the last hit actor, so it doesn't know what the target is anymore. This is the last hit actor. It's going in through here, but we've cleared it, so we don't have a target anymore. So it doesn't actually make it over here. We don't get to this print string when we look away. So that's where the sequence comes into play. So when this is false, when we look away, essentially, start a sequence. The first thing, before you do anything, before you clear anything, the first thing I want you to do, Unreal, is just pass on that information that we looked away. Then, and only then, only after you pass that information on, then you should clear this so that we get the functionality of when we look back at this thing, it calculates again. All right? So this sequence is really important right here. First, just pass on the information. Now, what we see is everything is working as expected. We look at this thing, it says true, it's a hit. We look away, it says false. All right, that's really important that we pass on that information of is looking. The reason for that is now, when we look at this thing, we get the widget. When we look away, the widget disappears. That's super, super important. All right. So there you have it. That was the second enhancement that I made. Take a look at this. Take a second to screenshot this if you want time to process this a little bit more and understand what's going on. It's always best if you could just play around and add print strings. That is how I got through this. I just added print strings and just sat and racked my brain for why isn't this working the way I thought it would work? And finally, I understood it, right? So don't think that I just got this right off the bat. This took some brain power. It took some troubleshooting, but we got there. And this is the current setup. Could this change? Absolutely. As of now, this is where I have things. Okay, the last change, or second to last change, really simple. In our blueprint first person character, you'll remember I was casting to a controller on event begin play. And then we were adding the mapping context for the enhanced input. I got a great comment that said, Don't do it this way, even though this is the way Unreal does it in their blueprint template for like first person, third person. Don't do it this way. The reason for that is it kind of ties us down to only controlling or possessing our main character. If you have a game where you only plan on possessing the main character, that's fine. You could handle the logic within your blueprint first person character. But I don't plan on having that. I want the flexibility to be able to, for example, get in a vehicle, which has a totally different control, a player controller, or I want to be able to possess like a drone and look through the drone's camera feed and control things through there, or like look through a security camera. So if we want to do that, all of those things, then we don't want to handle the controller and event enhanced input in our actual character. We can create what's called a player controller. So to do that, you just right click under blueprints, or sorry, it's just a blueprint class, and it's a player controller class. So I did that. I created a new player controller. It's just under core character, not input, let's see, systems, all right? And I created a new player controller. Now I didn't think I had a player controller before because I couldn't find it anywhere in the blueprints. But if you don't have a player controller, Unreal automatically comes with a player controller that it assigns just by default, because it has to have something. So in my main game, my gameplay blueprint here, I had this player controller class set to player controller, which is the one that just comes with Unreal, or came with Unreal. So I created a new player controller, and now I am using that as my player controller class, which by default, the character will just use. The character class is just using that because it's default, unless we specify something else. So within that player controller, so just double click on that blueprint that opens up this. In the event graph, now at event begin play, I don't have to cast to anything because I'm already inside of the player controller, so I don't have to cast like we were doing before. And now we're just taking the enhanced input local player subsystem, we're checking if it's valid, and if it is valid, then we are adding that mapping context. So now we get control of our player. If I got rid of this and I compiled and started gameplay, then I can't do anything. I'm moving my mouse, I'm not looking around. So we are getting that, adding that mapping context of our input mapping context, okay? So now everything works again as normal. Again, the reason for this is since we're handling this in a new player controller and not handling it within our blueprint first-person character, now we have the flexibility down the line. We can possess different objects. We can have different player controllers for things like getting in vehicles, looking through security cameras, controlling drones, whatever we want to do, which I want the flexibility to do that. So this just seemed a little bit cleaner. All right, we're almost there. Last little update that I made before we move on to the next video where we're going to actually add new functionality instead of cleaning up and optimizing. Last one is, since this is becoming a bigger project and I want to work on this long term, I decided to just go ahead and set up a repository for this. Now, why would you set up like a version control repository? Well, obviously it's good for like small teams or even big teams where you can work with each other. You can see what's been updated. You can check out assets to work on while someone else works on something else, and you're not overlapping and saving over each other. That's one reason for it, but I'm an indie developer. Well, it comes down to 3 reasons. Number one, I want to be able to back up my work on something other than my local machine. God forbid something happens to my computer and I lose my files for some reason. You know, I don't want to lose months, or I don't know how long I'm going to work on this project. I don't want to lose months or years of work that I've been doing because my local machine died. So it backs up my work. Number 2 is I can go back to old versions if I goof something up. So if I make some weird change and I can't access my Unreal file anymore, instead of trying to troubleshoot that from outside the file, getting into the code and all that mess, I could just back up to a previous version and save myself a lot of time because I have a history, a repository of my old commits, which is really, really useful for obvious reasons. Again, it just saves the project if something weird happens. And number 3 is I am making devlogs, so it gives me a nice way to look back on old commits that I made, or the comments that I made with each commit, where I could see, okay, these are the changes that I made, make a little list, and when I do my devlog update, I can just look back and say, these are the things that we did. So the version control I'm using is Diversion. I've brought them up a few times. They're not a sponsor of this channel yet. You know, I always hope that someone decides to be a sponsor and support us. They did send me this nice mug, which of course, you know, maybe that's sponsorship. But the reason I chose them is their plugin just works really easy to set up with Unreal. So I installed the desktop app for diversion control, which looks like this. We'll get into that in a second. And then I just came up to my plugins and I installed the diversion version control plugin. After that's installed, it restarts Unreal just because it's a new plugin like anything. But then you come down to reversion control and you can change your, revision control settings. And they have diversion as a provider. You could just select it. And the first time I came here, I didn't have my project set up, and there was literally just a button here. It was a one-click solution. I clicked it, just like that, the whole repository was set up, and it showed up after it was connected to my Diversion desktop app, and I just accepted the settings. And then in Diversion, if I go back to my home here, I have my game project here, which is unnamed. So if I click on this, I could see my latest commits, and this is what I'm talking about. I could see the latest commits that I made and the comments that I made. So when I commit a new change, I could just commit changes, all right? And then it has me make a commit message. So I say, this is the stuff I did today, all right? Or whatever my message is. I try to be as specific as possible. I hit commit, and it will create a new version in Diversion, the desktop app, and I can see the latest commits. Now, this is nice to look back on the comments that I make on my commits, but also we have this history. So if I go to my history, we have all of my commits that I make. I can search for a commit by name. I could just look down the list in order. And what can we do with this? Well, let's say these latest changes I did last night just killed my project and I couldn't recover it. I could come back to this last one and I could say revert to this commit, all right? Or if I wasn't specific enough, I can come in here and I could say edit commit message, all right? I could create a branch from here. Maybe I'm going in a different direction to experiment for a little bit. There's so much you could do here, and I just want to drive home the fact that whatever revision control you decide to use, it's not just for teams. There's so much usefulness. I can back up my work. I can go back to versions if I screw something up, and I can get a nice history of the changes that I made. Even as an indie developer, it's just very useful to have this. So thanks Diversion Control for building a great tool. I hope they become a sponsor someday of this channel. I have a new sponsor tier on my Patreon. If you're a company, if you have software, you want to go check that out. It doesn't guarantee that I say nice things about you, but it does, I will check out your tool, I will review it, and I'll just give honest feedback. And I'll bring up your brand in the brand section in the video, which we don't have there, just in the credits. When I go through like the Patreon names, I'll list your company, your product as a sponsor of the channel. So there's that if you're a company, if you want to get on the Patreon and check that out. But yeah, those are the changes. So just to quickly review, instead of event tick, we're doing the event on a timer for our line trace. I improved the line trace system so that now it's only giving a hit every time I look at it or look away. And we're still getting that widget showing up, which is really nice. And the last change was, or the second to last change was, instead of handling the casting to player controller within the first person character, we now have a player controller that just adds the mapping context that's set to default in the game mode. And the last one is I started using diversion revision control, which is really nice for the reasons I got into. So yeah, this has just been a quick one, 26 minutes, maybe not so quick, but I just wanted to go over the optimizations I made on the last one. The next devlog video will not be this recap. We're gonna go straight into all of the new features that I'll add between now and then and have a lot of new stuff to look at. So thanks for checking this out. Thanks for supporting me over on patreon.com/RileyB3D. Thank you to these people who are displaying on screen right now. These are my supporters. I appreciate you. You're making it possible, getting closer to my goal of making a living doing this. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'll see you in the next devlog update. Thanks.